Okay, it's 8:02. I say we start. I hit record before everybody came on so that I wouldn't forget. So that part's done. Let's quick go around the room because there's quite a new faces here. So I'll call on you, just kind of wave your hand and tell us a little bit about yourself. So I'm Ann Forrest. I am currently living in West Seattle, not really associated with the hub at the moment because I just moved to this neighborhood. So Bill, can you go next?
Yeah, this is Bill Fay. Live on Queen Anne with the Queen Anne Community Hub.
Gabrielle Gerhard. I'm with the Windermere North Sandpoint Hub, kind of in the area by Magnuson Park.
Susie Scott, Broadview Hub South. We actually have two hubs, and I am hub captain in training under Pat Mock.
Cindy Barker, Morgan Hub.
Excellent. Susanna?
Susanna Cunningham, Lake City Hub on the Fred Meyer parking lot there.
This is Jody Grage, Ballard Commons Park Hub.
Chris Paulus, North Capitol Hill Hub.
Frank Lawler, Madison Valley Hub.
Jim Duran, Finney Hub.
Ann Bond, I'm the East Lake Hub, Eastside Lake Union.
Dolores Canis, Alaska Junction, West Seattle. It's located at Hope Lutheran, so it's a church. So it's Hope Lutheran / Alaska Junction hub.
Peter Honey, Madison Valley Hub.
Linda Norland, Lakewood Seward Park Hub.
Hi, Ellen Santorelli. I'm in the new Montlake Hub.
Yep, Ed Falk, Mary's here too. We're with the South Wallingford Hub.
Ellen Stecker from the Roosevelt Hub.
At Mork and Broadview at Luther Memorial.
Nice turnout. I'm going to go through a couple slides and then just ask folks to kind of chat about their experience. This is just the slides for the after action report. There's a lot more words that go with this, but so we had 13 hubs. That's kind of how they're scattered. We did prep sessions. We did 3 prep sessions where we gave the chance for hub captains and their teams too to join us and just kind of talk about how to get ready, what the purpose of the drill was, what we were going to be looking at as far as evaluation at a network level, encouraging individual hubs to make their own goals. We talked about a lot of stuff. We talked about creating a blueprint so that your volunteers know where to set up. We talked about the safety briefing so that you start the exercise and everybody, pays attention to being safe and moving carefully. And talked about, we hit all kinds of topics. So we divided up the topics into 3 different sessions, kind of based on what we thought was the most important first. The first one was pretty much getting permission from your landlord, your property manager to host the drill, and then moved forward from there. We also included a radio prep session. If the hub captains wanted to attend, they were more than welcome, but definitely get their GMRS radio folks on the call. Miles pretty much ran that one, did a nice job, got a lot of good feedback on helping folks get prepared for the radio side of this exercise. And then basically our goal was making matches. It was I think it was a really low key, not a high tech kind of drill, really just trying to get folks comfortable with this idea of making matches, both in the supply/resource area and in the volunteer area. So that was really the goal. General lessons learned we pulled out of the survey that we sent to the 13 hub captains that participated. By and large, everybody really appreciated the chance to do the drill. There wasn't anybody that said, oh my God, terrible experience, won't go through that again. I think in general, people appreciated the push to get organized, to make some decisions about where to set up, how to reach out to volunteers, all that kind of stuff. So I think people really appreciated the chance to get organized and just that little extra push from a network level of let's make this happen. And I do want to say quite a few of the hubs that participated this year also had participated last year. So I think that says that says good things about the fact that this was a good experience for just about everybody. I did hear a little bit about vetting volunteers. We had some folks that kind of surprised us, especially in the radio arena, where they showed up as the radio operator and kind of didn't really get what they were supposed to do. So we got a few people had comments about, hey, I think I'll just check in with my volunteers before the drill and make sure they know what they're getting into. And then quite a few comments about the radio prep was very helpful. I know I learned a lot. I'm not a big radio person. I learned a lot more about nets and why they're important and how they operate and that kind of stuff. So I think moving forward, we will probably include at least one session with radio folks to get them kind of used to the rhythm of the radio. We did hear radio speech was too fast, very difficult to copy it all down. And then consistently, we heard radio folks need more support. Giving them a radio assistant isn't enough. They really needed a runner in between where they were and where the hub was. So that was pretty consistent across the board. I thought that was really interesting. Other thoughts that kind of came up, questions that came up. Where does shelter available get posted? And I'm going to stop sharing and just take a look at you guys and see. I guess this came up, which makes perfect sense. If you got a message from wherever, from a neighbor, it came in over the radio, however it came to your attention, to your hub's attention, that you have shelter available, where do you post that information? Does it go in the resources, the supply area, or does it go on the whiteboard for the entire community? So just anybody unmute and tell us what your thoughts are.
For us, it goes both places.
Both places? Okay.
I think the greeter would refer them to resources, but resources would make sure that it got on the info board. That big of a resource and potentially addressing so many people.
Okay.
I mean,
This
that's
is
easier
Gabrielle.
said than
Oh.
done, of course.
Yeah, that's the ideal, I guess. Yeah. Go ahead. Somebody else was talking.
Oh, Gabrielle, I thought Jim was done. Sorry. We did the same thing. I was at Wedgwood, and for if it was big, multiple people, we were putting it on the info board, and then we were sending them over to resources as well.
Okay. I think that makes perfect sense that it gets posted in both, especially on the information board. If it's a large shelter, I think it definitely needs to get there. I think putting it in the resources area is not a nice to have, but I don't think it's as vital as getting it put on the board so that the entire community understands that it's available. So any other comments about that one?
Seems to me that for smaller places that can only, house a few people, that we have it on the supply form, so that they don't get overwhelmed. So maybe it would be good to do larger shelters, but even then, I wonder how you keep them from getting overwhelmed by too many people. But I think smaller ones should go on the supply form. So yeah,
I think that makes a lot of sense. If you can only handle like one or two households in your particular space, then yeah, that's not something you necessarily want to open up.
But
to the whole
also
community.
maybe for the bigger ones, there needs to be some head count or criteria, or so that places don't get overwhelmed, and so that there's some matching attempts.
Yeah. Hopefully they would send a runner back to the hub and go, hey, stop, we're full. Yeah, that's a good point. Cindy, go ahead. Your hand's up.
Mine's kind of a tail along about that, is because if you have it in both places and they come back and they say we're full, the whiteboard is probably going to be the only place they remember to erase it, and somebody could still be going over to resources, get sent over, and then be told that it's full. So that posting in two places always gives you update problems. So that's the only thing I like the idea of the big places, you know, anything maybe that can cover more than X number 10 or 5.
Yeah.
Go on the whiteboard, and the onesies go to resource, you know.
Yeah, good point, Cindy. So keep that in mind. If you're posting it in 2 different areas, you gotta update it in 2 different areas too. Let's see what else kind of came up. Oh, this was a good one. What gets passed up via radio? And this was, you know, my bust. I wrote some scenarios that should not have risen to that level. So we're going to review what is in, I believe it's in your radio operator book as well as your radio assistant book. I'm kind of looking at Cindy to see if she's going to shake her head. Yes.
I remember.
Okay. I pulled it out of the radio assistant, so I know it's in there. Hopefully it's in your radio operator's guide too. So anyway, priority order when sending either to the city or to another hub. So this is, in general, this is the only information that goes up to the city or even to another hub. So lives or people's, plural, people's safety is at significant risk on a large scale. So not one-offs, not one building is on fire.
Hey, Anne, I'm sorry to interrupt, but this has always been just to the city, not to another hub. The other hub criteria was not, we never even got to that point.
Okay. I pulled this directly out of the radio assistant, so I didn't add this other piece. So little bit of clarification we need to do here. So large or multiple buildings are on fire and possibly spreading. So again, big stuff. Major infrastructure damage or dangerous new infrastructure conditions. So the city might want to know about that, might. Obviously, you're going to respond to them if they ask a direct question, like, how are things going? Are things getting better, getting worse? And then in response to a low priority request from another hub, you would send information out.
I think that got corrupted when we, because I know that the city is to the city, and that last line's not on there, and that's all we'd ever done. And I think maybe when we were doing the books, we made some decisions that we probably should have gone back and revisited. But the city is super clear. I mean, hub to hub is different because we can do that on GRMS, but hub to city was going to take up or set expectations that the city was then going to do something with that information, and we had no way of knowing that. So they said we want to limit it, and if we want something different than those first 3 points, we will ask you for it. So that helped us understand, you know, really there's only certain conditions to send to the city. We can have another discussion about hub to hub. That really is a different level. If I've got a hub within a half a mile of me and they can help me dig people out, I'm going to make that ask, you know.
Yeah.
And
okay. So I wrote myself a note to clarify these priorities and get it out to you so that we're all clear and all on the same sheet of music. Catherine, go ahead. I see your hand.
So I do have a few thoughts about radio, and it really needs to be followed up with Lee and folks that did radio. But I got one reaction, which was, we really are trying to do GMRS here. And Madison Valley is less than 10 blocks away. And why wouldn't you communicate to Madison Valley if there was a fire in a building literally between you, 5 blocks in either direction?
Yep. Yeah. We agree.
To a block of buildings on fire. And the reaction was, well, that's not in our scenarios to practice. And they're like, I got a GMRS radio. You know, I could just walk outside and not be part of this and connect with another GMRS and tell them the neighbor's house is on fire. So there was a little bit of tension. And then at the end of the whole thing, they said that whole quick start needs to be thrown out and redone for GMRS. So I don't know what's going on, but that's the reaction I got. And I was like, well, we need the radio people to talk to each other.
Okay. Yeah, I saw your comments about the quick start needing some clarification. Yeah, that definitely came out in this drill that radio is one of our weaker areas. Thanks, Catherine. Go ahead, Susanna.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment that there's a second level. If the radio people on amateur radio are organized as we plan to organize, then things from the hubs would go to their sector. And so that's a second filter area where if it's deemed not to be the city's not something the city's going to want, it would get filtered out at the sector level, because the individual hubs as planned and as well-run radio would not actually be talking directly to the city. They would be talking to their sector coordinator, and the sector coordinators only talk to the city. So that's if it runs well and properly, which it can. I've been in situations where it has. That's how it would be.
Thanks, Susanna. Yeah, I forgot to throw in there the sector piece of this.
I do want to say, I am so pleased to get this input about radios, because this is the first exercise we've ever gotten enough radio work and enough messages going where we finally got to a good testing phase. Other times we finally get up on plane of the radio stuff about the last 15 minutes of the drill. So this was great that we can identify what needs to be improved. So yay.
Yeah, very true, Cindy, very true. So citizen actors, one of the questions we asked was, how many people do you think came by? The average was 26, which, you know, for an average is not bad. There were some that, you know, had less than 10, and there were some that had more than 40. Other helpful hints, and this actually I pulled out of the after action report from last year, from 2023. I think based on some of your comments, I think some of these are still really relevant. Consider storing rocks underneath your box to act as paperweights. A couple people were struggling with wind. Store bags of sand or canopy weights under your box. I don't know that anybody used canopy weights during the drill because I don't think it was that windy, but not a bad idea. Duct tape gets really gummy when it's old, so don't necessarily count on that. And then message taker is often the bottleneck. And I think folks did a really good job of getting around what we typically find as a bottleneck, which is the message taker. And I think a lot of you had extra message takers, which was really interesting. Resource matches. Ballard Commons wins this category with a high of 31 matches for supplies. Volunteer matches, Madison Valley won this category and had a high of 10 matches. So good job, Ballard Commons and Madison Valley. You guys had the folks through there and had skilled enough volunteers to get those matches made. So nicely done. Just a couple pictures here. I thought this was a really nice one. Very organized board. You know, she's got categories. I can read the writing, which is fabulous. So nice job, whoever hub that was. I thought these were really well done. I thought it was kind of interesting that they're on the ground, but when you look closer, there's no way to hang these boards. So just something to think about. I thought this was a lovely picture. This is actually Madison Valley. They had closed down a street, so lots of folks standing around and talking and engaged. I thought this was a nice picture. It just kind of shows how some folks are using the pantry organizers. And that's all I have. I didn't prepare a whole lot else. I did want to go around to each of the hub captains. I asked them to tell us one thing that was surprising about their drill that maybe I hadn't mentioned. I'm just going to pick on you guys as we go. Bill, you had said you had a couple thoughts. So,
well, I guess the big surprise was the layout. We put them in sort of a semicircle, which helped rather than a big line. And then, of course, we also printed up a handout that had identification as to what this was. So you could see that, okay, the visitors start here, they talk to the pre-greeter, they talk to the greeter is going to send them this way or that way, and there's the message taker, you know. And so that was helpful to actually hand somebody something or show somebody, this is what the physical layout is. And I think the semicircle worked in the way of, because of we're caught between the building and the sidewalk, we couldn't really make it a U or anything like that. So that was probably one of the better improvements that we made. Of course, we had pretty low turnout. We had just enough people to staff, and basically about 12 people took scripts, and we only had one match out of the whole thing. So, in the future, we want to look at better tracking of people's skills in order to make that whole volunteer skills process work a little bit better. That's about it.
Excellent. Thanks, Bill. Yeah, I think that semicircle thing, I think that is key. We've seen that a couple times where if you put all your canopies or your areas in a straight line, the two ends don't seem to be able to talk as easily. So that semicircle, think about that. And if you can make that happen in your site, that I would highly encourage it. Thanks, Bill.
Well, of all the drills, this has actually been relatively better. So I didn't have any ant infestations this year. I agree that the semicircle map was very good. I made copies and handed them out. So that was helpful. I think I would have wanted to rearrange them. Now that I have the concept, I'm going to put the message taker over by the resource person, put the volunteer a little further away, but ended up with only one canopy, or what the where you put the slots in. What were you referring to that as?
Oh, the pantry organizer?
Yeah, the pantry organizer. I'm getting another one so I can get the volunteers more separate, because I had them all in one and they weren't really very organized. So I gotta expand my capacity and separate that out. I think we needed to have the volunteers there earlier, because they came pretty much in the 15 minutes before starting, and it was a scramble. I want to have their volunteer start time at least an hour before, so we can start with a little more organization. It was a much better year, making incremental progress, but it really helped to have those prep sessions with you to think through things. And it does take practice. I mean, you can't just think this out and not do it. You really encourage people to stand up and do a drill. That's the way I've learned, and sometimes it's hard learning, but man, it really is worth the time and effort.
That's helpful encouragement. Thanks, Dolores.
We did a couple things that I thought worked pretty well. I printed up some new forms based on the volunteer form that we had for supplies and volunteer. Can you see these? Anyhow, let me get some more light on the subject here.
Hey, Jody, I'll get a copy from you when we talk tomorrow, and I'll send it out to the group in a minute.
Anyway, each of these has 15 categories, which matches the 15 categories on the 3 pocket things we had for volunteers and supplies. So what we did was have the greeters send people to the tent, to the canopies, and we had people there to hand them the form, get them to do have or need, and circle what they wanted. And we did not use message takers or clipboards, and it worked. So what we decided when we were talking afterwards was what we will do in an actual event, and in fact for when we activate also for practice, is the first person that comes to each canopy is going to be at the table in the front. The second person is going to be in charge of finding matches, so that we don't have people wandering off when we actually have matches. And we're even talked about having a volunteer break room, a separate canopy, and people who are waiting for matches can go chill there for a bit and see if one turns up shortly, or if there's one there already. And so the first person that gets to a canopy would be at the table. The second person would be in charge of finding matches ASAP. And the third person would be a second person at the table. But we didn't use any clipboards. We didn't have any message takers. We sent people right to the tents, and it worked really well. And we had quite a few people there. So we want to work that out even better next time by how we send our volunteers. The other thing that we did.
Jody, before you go on, I have a question on that. What will you do if the first 5 people show up and what they're looking for is not on one of your existing categories?
Well, I think the hub manager would whisk over there and figure out what to do.
All I'm going to say is we guess what categories there are, and we have no idea what will happen in reality.
Yes, and we can upgrade our form.
Yeah,
Go
just
ahead.
develop your system so it's more flexible.
Okay.
Right? Have 5 lines of write in the blank or something. Just, we have no idea what people are going to have or need after a disaster, and it's going to be more than 15 categories, I guarantee it. So just think
each of these has an other or miscellaneous category also, so that we have that worked in. But it seemed like from what we saw that was a good way to spread the people about. So we also, there was also a big call to have Ballard specific scripts. So we are going to get together and write Ballard specific scripts. What we did for the volunteers was on the sign-up sheet, there was only one opening for each station to start with. We had a skills fair, and a lot of people who were, kind of fresh off the streets volunteered right off the bat. And what we're trying to do is train people at specific things. So once someone who is already, on our mailing list and we could talk to and knew about, signed up for the task, then we opened the second slot for a person who was in training. And we got a lot of people volunteering. We had enough people to fill 2 slots in the spaces, and then more people came drifting in. So we had quite a few volunteers we could shuffle around. Ballard-centric. So we had one lead person so if you put up 2 slots and they're both filled by people who are new, that didn't seem to us to be as strong a thing as having one person who we knew and then get backup people to learn. And that did work pretty well. I think that's about it.
Excellent. Thanks, Jody. Yeah, Jody did quite a bit of management of her sign up. Like she said, opened one spot, got it filled with somebody she was comfortable with, and then opened it up and had random people kind of go in. So kudos to Jody for taking an active role in that.
First of all, I'll say that the prep sessions were really helpful in getting me at least oriented towards activities that are going to happen during the drill and how to focus the volunteers on what needs to be done. We did ours a little different, as you mentioned. It was in a different site than our actual hub box and our probably true activation site is, but we balanced that to try to, attract participants. What worked really well was this was the first time for us that we've set everything up and had all 4 canopies up and had all our, our pantry organizers and our whiteboards and everything up. So it was really, that alone was just really helpful for us to get a sense of how things look, what we might want to change or customize. People have talked about the single pantry organizer versus 2, so that you split up the wants and the haves on different, so it really got us thinking as to how things work for us and how we would want them to work, next time. In terms of improvements, we didn't print out a blueprint or a cheat sheet of which stations are where and what it was, or at least, our canopies are colored, so we could just call them by color or whatever. And then we should have done that, or it would have been a helpful resource to the people participating, specifically the greeter and some others. The canopies were located pretty much close enough to each other so that there could be communication without it being too loud from one to another. But it would have been a little easier to hand someone something that says, "Oh, you want to go to purple resources," and they can just look up and see where it is. Frank, anything else?
Yeah, that's a pretty good summary. I think also a lot of the other hubs have ran into a lot of the issues and observations we had. Couple of things. The idea that we really maybe should have the concept of a runner as a separate role. We've talked about this before. For us, as Peter said, our tents were close enough that this wasn't an issue. But if we were more spread out, you can imagine having to go from send a message from one tent to another, and you don't want to leave the tent alone if you're the person staffing it. So it'd be great to have, like, ideally a bunch of Boy Scouts who are just running around carrying messages back and forth. One thing that Peter suggested, and that I think is a really good idea, is thinking about having a longer special drill so that we can actually practice doing a shift change.
Oh, I forgot.
Yeah.
That would be great. I mean, I was like, "Hey, and we could like pack up the boxes if it's overnight and unpack it again." And Peter's like, "We don't want to do that." But if we just having the shift change would be a great experience. That's something I don't think we've ever really practiced, have we?
I don't think so.
Not recently. It was like back in 2013 or so was the last time we did it.
All right.
And
I wrote
I
that
like
down
the
as a
idea, yeah.
possibility for the future.
I think a good option, just to see what people think about it, is to have a two-part drill. Part one for the new hubs who just had the goal of let's get set up and let's play a little bit, and then they can stop. But for the ones who are like, we really want to see what this is going to be like in 4-hour increments or 3-hour increments, they continue on along with the radio people, because sometimes it takes the radio folks an hour just to get set up. And then that way the radio messages can continue to go for another hour or two. So that would give really strong advancing hubs that shift change and that extra time opportunity. But it would be okay if people close down at the first increment.
Just had two other things. One was having a big sign for people that says "Start here" by the greeter, so that people don't wander over to other tents. We actually set up a tall pole with an orange vest as a flag on the top of it, and then we could just say, "Just go to the flag." And I think we managed to avoid having anybody just kind of wander in and go over to resources or something, didn't we, Peter?
Yeah.
And finally, have we looked into getting the equivalent of a block watch sign for our hubs, which would have an easy to recognize logo, and it would just have the location of our hub? In other words, it would go up on a pole, metal sign. It just says your hub is at, then the street address. Just thinking, it would be a great way to just have that permanent presence all the time. Because right now, I think the only thing that's allowable like that is the block watch program, and I was wondering if we could pattern it after that.
Chris has his hands up, and then I can tell you some history with SDOT.
Well, I just want to say one of the things that came up. I was at the Braeburn Hub, and it was really interesting to think about the things that wouldn't fit in the hub box, but maybe you need in an event, and like crowdsourcing them in the moment. So like the signs and like cardboard that you could direct people where they need to go. That there can be plenty of signs up before the event. I'm never going to read them, but during an event, I'm going to want to know where they are. So that's a really interesting piece I hadn't thought of like previously.
in the early days, and Susanna will remember this at Lake City, because they wanted to put up permanent signs, and we got a real ration from both the Office of Emergency Management about, because we weren't, you know, by 2013, we'd only been around for 4 or 5 years, and they didn't believe we were going to last. So they were not ready to, you know, commit to permanent locations. We do have hubs that have retired, right, and gone off the map. So we'd have to remember to take signs down, and we would have to probably get a permit from SDOT, because those are signs in the street right away, and you have to get insurance and pay for those, the last time I heard. So, I mean, it's good. It's an idea, and we can start investigating it. But I'm more inclined to go with Chris's thing, because if you actually have to move your location because the Brayburn condo collapsed, you can take your portable signs and some chalk and go this place to this place instead. So pros and cons both ways.
Okay. Thanks, Mad Valley. Good good report out. All right, and we've got Broadview.
I thought it went pretty well. We didn't have as many people as I had hoped. We are, for the Broadview South area, we are still working on change of ownership of the property where our box is, which is another reason where I'm like, I don't know if a permanent side would be a good thing. We closed part of our street, and that worked out all right. I thought it was surprising me, and Pat had mentioned this too, how much longer it took to set it all up than it did to take it down. I thought we did pretty well on matches. I was a little bit confused and overwhelmed as the hub manager, so that was a big learning curve for me. I want to practice more, but some of the neighbors that got involved were just fun. Like, we had one guy who was there with he had limited sight disability and something else, and he totally got into the role and closed his eyes. Closed his eyes, had his son lead him around. So that part was fun.
Well, I just want to give you credit for jumping in and doing as much as you've been doing and taking on hub manager and all. So kudos to you. Some things that we tried new is I reprinted some of the resource and some of the volunteer forms on green paper, and others were on white. And the green ones were to be used for people that need either a volunteer or they need a specific thing, food, whatever. And the cue was green has 2 E's in it and need has 2 E's in it. So you could match that up in your head. And then the white forms were used for people that had the stuff on offer. And when we put the greens and the whites in the pockets in our kitchen organizers, it was, you could file all the green together and kind of flip through those when you're looking for a match, somebody that needs something. So that seemed to be just a little detail that helped. The volunteers all thought it was useful. I was very worried about having enough volunteers, like up to the week before, like I think many of the other hub captains were. And all of a sudden, like the weekend before, like 5 to 7 people came on board, and we actually had most of the roles have 2 people, which was great because those 2 people could talk to each other and encourage each other and discuss what was the best way to handle something, because a lot of the volunteers are still pretty new. I made a point to ask people to really work on their printing, make everything legible. If it isn't readable, it's not usable. And I would say everybody really took that to heart. I'd say 99% of everything that was written down was just readable. So that was great. And we have since had a post-event social, and we discussed a little more some of the feedback, and it was a little bit of a combination, get to know you a little better and plan ahead what we might do. And I think my group is just really bonding, and so that was a very big plus for me. And plus we get a little practice at the social. So that's all I have to say.
Nice.
I'm going to add in there that Pat has done an excellent job of strong arming all of her neighbors. So I'm going to have to work on that to catch up, because if we didn't have people in her area, we're going to have to, but people didn't know about the Broadview South section, or that we even had the hub. So that was good. We're going to work on that, growing it.
Good thought. I just put in the chat, if you don't have them already, I would suggest a pack of name tags in your box, not the one that says Hub Manager, but the one that says Ann or whatever on it, the sticky kind. I think it really goes a long way. Yeah, and Sharpies goes a long way towards building that camaraderie and making it easier for all your volunteers to chat. Ann, Bon.
Let's see. I'd say the first thing was, brother, it was so much easier to put up the tents on year 2 than year 1. Year 1 was just horrible, and everybody felt much better about it this year. So that was a nice thing to discover. We are one location that had a terrible fail with an unfamiliar radio person who signed up. So I really agree that vetting some of your volunteers in advance seems essential. That sort of screwed up so much of our ability to post information or just feel like there was dialogue in the drill itself. I was surprised by how poor our walk by traffic was, and I felt that meant that we had not as many volunteers come to participate in the drill as I'd hoped for. Our area tends to be a very high traffic area, but maybe afternoon is not quite as good. I mean, I was sort of trying to, after the fact, figure out why it was so poor. It was a cool day, which meant there were maybe fewer people walking. It was Pride weekend, and so maybe people were elsewhere in the area. You know, both sort of things to consider what, you know, might be competing for people's attention on certain days. But, you know, still on the whole, I think that the exercise went well in spite of those things. But I was nonetheless disappointed by how much walk by traffic we had.
I also like the idea of the 2 colors. I think colors really do help us with from the other hub. So that was a good thing. I was pleased by the number of people who turned up and how well everybody worked together. We made a narrow opening with yellow caution tape, so people had to come through one point, and I think that worked quite well because it gave us more control over the people. I think we're going to have to be really flexible with those pantry organizers and their categories. I think we just have to be ready to be flexible and ready to discuss and ready for the fact that there might be more than one right answer sometimes, that things can go multiple places or they might go here, might go there. So we have to all be ready to learn in the moment.
So yeah, from the top, the preparation work, the prep meetings were just unimaginable trying to do this without all the work Ann did, and fellow other hubs being involved. That was all very exciting. We did not get the volunteers. We don't have an active hub group. Really, we have 3 people who are hanging in there. But so we have work to do. But other than that, so we weren't trying to get, we didn't have a big pool to pick volunteers from. So we scoped it to information and radio. And I think we did pretty good with that. We also set up, and it was spectacular, it's wonderful, set up the resource and volunteer tents and had the flow so anybody could come, kind of like show and tell. And so there was a lot of discussion about hubs in general and what they're for, and practicing. Pretty much, I thought it was a very steady clip, practicing the scenarios. Wonderful suggestion I heard. Make up scenarios for your area. I think that would be wonderful to try and do. The note to self is start working the mailing list and building the hub. But for what we needed to do, that I think was good. A runner between radio and information or hub manager really would have been helpful, because the poor person, Brandy was trying, and thank you, Rainier Beach, for sending us 2 wonderful people. Brandy needed to be the radio assistant. And running really wasn't, you know,
part of that. Yeah.
So it just became kind of, they were saying we should just have the radio tent with the rest of them. And I'm like, no. But I could see where it went there. The only other thing I was thinking about was how important it was that all of us, Lee, myself, and Karen, had participated in desktop training or other hub events. I mean, how important it was to us that Capitol Hill had drills so I could play radio systems like one time. Or your Judkin Parks, the regional sort of drill where I could play greeter. And it's just the doing of it any way possible for newbies or people doing hubs. Keep that in mind, because that was why they could bring their partners and spouses, and setting up the tents, other than the fact that we need to fundraise for more tents, really wasn't a challenge, because we had a lot of strong bodies and we had a map because Ann prepared us to do that, and all that. That was not the headache. Focusing on building our hub group is probably the headache, and I think radio, I just am not versed in it, and then getting that improved is an interest. So other than that, it was a spectacular step for our hub to take.
Good. Thanks, Catherine.
Yeah, at Finney, drill wise, we realized that we didn't have any records to keep track of volunteer matches because there's no paper trail. What we should have had is a log just to, for collecting data for the drill, but we didn't think of that. So our volunteer match count was not very, very good.
Yeah. Do you not use forms, Jim?
Well, somebody comes to the hub and they need a plumber. We've got a plumber. We give them the address and we send them off. Nothing gets written down.
Huh.
It's an in the moment match.
Yeah, you have an inventory of who's available, but you're not capturing needs of what's needed. Is that correct?
For volunteers, correct.
Yeah.
Because you could solve it. If there wasn't a plumber, you would have recorded that, right?
Well, in this scenario, someone comes, they need a plumber. We look on the board and we're able to give them a plumber that's in the neighborhood and we send them off. But so there's no piece of paper to stick in a folder, for example. Yeah.
Yeah. Perfect. Yeah. There's no need to count matches in the real thing.
Yeah. And if I'd thought ahead, we would just have kept a log of those matches, for the purpose of collecting drill data. And what I did is I put my message taker in the resource tent, and the message taker sort of worked for the resource manager. And what they found out is, and the two that did this, they said it worked really well, especially if this message taker was ready to jump in as a resource manager. So the two of them were just, when they were double teamed, they were both working, but then they would resort back to the message taker resource manager role. And they said that this worked really well for them. And that tent, of course, was the busiest, but that's typical, especially at the beginning of the event. And I didn't think we were going to be able to do radio because we just didn't have enough people to staff the stations. And at the last minute, we got some more people. And Miles was on some email exchanges with Ann, and so we were going to be able to have a radio operator plus a radio assistant. And Miles came and spent the day with them, and they learned so much. It was great. And one of them had only purchased a GRMS radio in April, so that they learned quite a bit. That was great. And Miles is a great teacher.
Yes. Yeah. Jim, did you want to say anything about you kind of pushed, so for everybody on the call, Jim and his volunteer coordinator worked together ahead of time to kind of push that role of the volunteer coordinator. This idea that they have warm bodies at their disposal that they could send out into the community to do things, to get information, to help evacuate buildings, whatever needed to be done. So did you want to say anything about that, Jim? Pushing the
Yes.
envelope?
What we did is exercise, I'd say, the logistics of the volunteer coordinator using GRMS and Simplex with volunteers. And like I said, it was just the mechanics of it. What we did is I had inserted some scenario slips that were printed on pink paper, and the greeter was instructed that those always go to the volunteer coordinator. You know, just we don't want the greeter making decisions. We wanted these particular scenarios to go to the volunteer coordinator. And then they would explain to the person that had walked up that you're now going to play the role of someone who has stopped and is helping out at the hub. So this person is now somebody volunteering at the hub on hand to help out. And then the volunteer coordinator sends them out to, whatever the scenario is. For example, go check on the church up the street. And we had a board with envelopes on it, and we give them a radio, give them a brief tutorial of how to use it. The biggest problem was volume in terms of, volume on the radio in terms of understanding, and that was the only headache. But they would go to the board, get the slip out of the envelope, and then radio the information back to the volunteer coordinator. And like I said, this was just kind of working through the mechanics, and also for the volunteer coordinator to be juggling volunteers coming up and dealing with the radio. And that was an issue at times. But it was kind of an experiment. It worked out well. Yeah, Cindy.
So they would say, go up and check and see if the shelter is full, and they would radio that back, something like that.
Well, for example, one of the scenarios was the volunteer coordinator sent them up to the church to see how the church was doing. Do they have any damage, whatever, what's the status? And then the person goes to the board, and the slip in the envelope was, they would say, there's no apparent damage at the church and no one's here. We're going to stop by the Finney condo complex on our way back. So for example,
but the radio volunteer coordinator then had to write down the church has no damage, and then what would they do with this damage information at a volunteer coordinator position?
We didn't write it down. We would have written it down if there was something, but I guess, that was just their assessment from what they saw from outside.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. If, like in one case where something was reported, I don't remember what the scenario was, but they recorded it and it was something that went over to information. Oh, that's right. It was something that would have been appropriately funneled to the information tent, and that's what they did.
Thanks, Jim. Anything else with that? Like, would you do that? Would you do that again? Was it valuable? Is there a better way to get information from the field back to the hub?
In a drill scenario, I don't know that it taught us that much. It was kind of an experiment, but there wasn't really any decision making to be done. but it did reveal that that it is useful. You know, you can have two volunteers out in the field and something else comes in and you can reroute them or tell them on your way back, you know, but having that communication is, I think, is very valuable. The other thing is that in terms of critical information, so to say, the importance of being able to communicate an issue back to the volunteer coordinator is because it's so dire that you're going to save that time that it would take back to get back by foot. So in terms of, you know, getting urgent information back, I don't think that's where this is the big benefit. I think it would be more being able to utilize your in the field volunteers more effectively by dispatching them somewhere else. Or
So you think if it was really big urgent information, it would just be simpler for them to hoof it back to the hub and pass on that information in person?
no, I think if it were, you know, super urgent information that, you know, maybe needs to get to the through the radio or to the hub manager, the time you save using the radio versus walking might be worth it. Although if it's something like, okay, we found out that there's this issue down the street, getting that radioed back versus walking it back, does it really matter? Given the, I mean, it has to be pretty critical for that to make a difference, that amount of time. That's what I mean.
Okay, thanks, Jim. I was curious how that all went. I don't have a lot else. Well, actually, let me back up. There have been some conversations. Miles, there's probably more people on the phone. Probably the drill prep team were on the phone. We were talking about this idea of asking folks next year to create their own neighborhood specific scenarios, and ones that you keep, you know, printed on a 3x5 card and have people turn it back in so you can use it over and over and make it really relevant to your situation, whatever that is. Medical facilities you have, or schools you really have, or clinics, or whatever. So I think that's probably going to be part of next year's drill, is very neighborhood specific scenarios.
Lesson learned on that. Do that like a month before, because we
Yes.
send that out the week before and tell the hub captains, here's the blanks, you know, fill in the blank, and people would print that out the night before and go, oh, I forgot to do this. So
Yeah,
we should just have a beer party where everybody writes in their own, you know, and we're all sitting around making things up. Yeah. And then they
Yep.
could go in and be available for everybody.
yeah. The other thing is maybe changing the format a bit. This having it on the same day in multiple locations, there's you know, there's pluses for that. There's also minuses. So not exactly sure what the format will look like next year, but it may be a little different than this one. I don't know if you remember, but a couple of years ago, we did one big drill in the north and one big drill on the south, 2 different days. And so a lot of hubs were able to play together and learn that way. So maybe not spreading out our talent across so many different sites. No decisions have been made. We'll talk to whoever's making those kinds of decisions next year, but maybe a different format.
Yeah, you know, the way that Ann did this is any hub could recreate Rumble Ready, because all the material is sitting there ready to go. What you would just have to have somebody help you with is the simulated radio messages coming in. So, you know, there's a possibility for during the year, a hub that didn't participate in Rumble Ready may in September go, oh, I really want to do that. And all the materials there, and you could spool that up. And then that would mean next year, maybe we do these, you know, very much larger ones, and people are able to just peel off and do their own individual ones. Or like West Seattle maybe wants to do 2 hubs within West Seattle on its own schedule. That's always the most difficult part, is finding the dates that work for everybody. So
Yeah. Not Wallingford, sorry. Laurelhurst. Bev was on the phone, but I think she had to drop off. She's on a train. Laurelhurst wants to use Rumble Ready, the kind of the blueprint, for their drill in September. And I'm like, yeah, absolutely. Use it. We didn't trademark the name or anything. It's yours. So don't be afraid to plagiarize.
Well, I think for Ballard, it's very important that there's time before the activation starts, 10 minutes at least, that at each station, everyone takes their bag of stuff, dumps it out on the table, and looks at all of it thoroughly. Because comments afterwards often indicate that that was not done, and the answers to the questions are in the bag, but nobody knew that. So
Yeah.
I've made a note in our 12:30 time to have 10 minutes when everyone goes to their stations and looks thoroughly through that bag, because there's a lot of good stuff in there, and as we get more stuff developed, there's more of it. But if people don't look at it, it doesn't work so very well.
That reminded me of something. It's important that everyone know what is on the self-help posters. Because it's easy not to be aware of what's over there, and they're not in your face necessarily, but that's an easy resource, and everyone should know to direct someone there right away if it's going to solve their problem.
Nice. Thanks, Jim. Hey, Bill, I'll call on you in just a second, but Jim reminded me of something. A couple people had asked, how can people get access to the self-help posters? And I think it's great that people want access to it, but keep in mind, those posters are meant for people that didn't prepare. They're not meant as preparedness guidance. This is, oh my God, I didn't do anything. Now what? So just, throw in that caveat when people ask for them. They're colorful. People think they're just gold, and they are. But anyway, they are available on the website. And I'll make sure that I put that link so that if you have volunteers that are interested in it, you can get them straight to where they can get those posters and they can print them out themselves. Go ahead, Bill.
Well, I had been told in advance that Jennifer Chow, who is the director of the Department of Neighborhoods, was going to come and visit my hub. Of course, I never saw her. Did she show up anywhere else?
not that we know of.
Okay.
Her office was the one who told me that she was going to be there. They try and they don't always make it. So.
Well, they contacted me and said, when's the best time? And I basically said, well, kind of make it after 1:30 because 1 to 1:30 is going to be kind of busy. And they wrote back and said, sure, after 1:30. So they even sort of knew me and knew where it was and all that kind of stuff. So.
Do you know what she looks like?
No, I don't.
Okay, well, she may have come and may not have introduced herself too. I can follow up with their office and ask if she did.
Okay. I mean, we did have somebody from Bob Kettle's office. He's city council, but he's District 7, which is Queen Anne. And she came, she's actually a resident of Queen Anne, and talked about it and took pictures, asked a lot of questions, and then wrote up this really big write-up in Bob Kettle's District 7 newsletter.
I think I sent that to all the hub captains.
Yeah. Okay, that's all.
The Seattle Times, so there was the article I sent out that was done by the Capitol Hill blog. And then right after that published, the Seattle Times has contacted and interviewed Anne and some other people. I guess she sent it to everybody, it looks like, from the BCCs I was getting. So we might see something, we may not, depending on the news cycle.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Thanks again.
And everyone.
Good job.